All right. If you were watching on YouTube, apologies for the brief hiccup. We were doing some testing to make sure that we could get our interpreters to show up properly. It looks like we fixed it, so we're going to keep on rolling. So, this next section is another micro talk about this game, a journey in bringing accessibility information to storefront descriptions. In this presentation, revolving around the 2021 update to Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, learn how the teams at Ninja Theory and Xbox approach creating a repeatable general framework for making accessibility features an integral component of game product descriptions. All right, let's start it.
Welcome everybody, thank you so much for joining today. I'm really excited to share with you some of the work that we've been doing over here at Ninja Theory in conjunction with our partners at Xbox Game Studios to help make accessibility information an absolutely integral aspect of our store product descriptions. But before we go on, just a very quick introduction. It's nice to meet you. My name is Dorian and I'm actually a career video game user interface designer. It's a profession that I've been practicing for over a decade, and I've had an incredible opportunity to work on some really cool titles such as FIFA and FIFA Ultimate Team, Warframe. I've worked within the Gears of War and Dungeons and Dragons franchises. I've worked on Destiny as well, but I'm currently working on Hellblade 2 and Project Mara here at Ninja Theory. However, today I'm not joining you as a UI designer, but I'm actually representing the other role that I hold, which is Ninja Theory's Studio Accessibility Champion. Now, if you're not familiar with Ninja Theory, we're a Cambridge, UK-based studio with over 22 years of history, developing titles such as Kung Fu Chaos, Heavenly Sword, Enslaved: Odyssey to the West, DMC: Devil May Cry, but perhaps most famously, we're the studio behind 2017's Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. And on that note, today we're actually going to be talking more specifically about the 2021 update to Hellblade. It was an enhanced edition that we made in collaboration with a game dev studio called QLock, and we brought significant improvements in two main areas. The first of them was a graphical upgrade. So we wanted to make a version of the game that would really shine on Xbox Series XS, as well as giving our PC players the opportunity to benefit from an enhanced version of the graphics if they had capable hardware to do so. Secondly, and this is where we come in, is that we took advantage of this update, this enhancement, to work in a range of new accessibility options that were not present in the original version of Hellblade. And obviously, we really wanted to showcase these. This was new and exciting and really beneficial to players. So there have been some precedents before in terms of how players are able to determine if they're going to be able to play a game. Notably, Stadia made some really important steps into this space when it came out. But other than that, it's mostly kind of historically been up to players to seek out this information, either from trusted content creators or publications like Can I Play That, to get this kind of critical information that will help them determine whether they can actually play a game or not. So one big thing that happened is in late 2021, however, there were some amazing additions that made their way to the Xbox storefronts, and they came in the form of kind of these fully integrated game accessibility feature tags. And these would essentially see games evaluated against a rubric of predetermined accessibility features, and if the title succeeded in including those accessibility features, they would be awarded with metadata tags which certified them as having these inclusions, and which would in result increase their billing within the accessibility sections of the store. So super awesome addition. So where our story resumes, however, is a tricky situation that we ran into with how titles are handled on the Xbox storefront platforms, where we actually have individual independent storefronts that are hosting either the PC version of the game or on the other side, the console release. Now, in our case on the PC side, it's pretty straightforward. Any PC player who downloads Hellblade gets the enhanced edition. This is the version that includes the graphical upgrades as well as the new accessibility options. However, on the console side, there are actually two versions of Hellblade being served within the exact same store listing, the original version and the enhanced version. Now, as a consumer, this is actually really a great experience because with the smart delivery system, you buy the game once and you get both. So what it does is basically it detects what hardware you're running on and will serve you the version of the game that corresponds to that. So if you're on Xbox Series XS, you will get served the enhanced version of Hellblade. However, if you're on Xbox One, you'll be served the original version of Hellblade. Now, if you're wondering what in the world all of this has to do with accessibility, this is actually what we're going to look at next. So on the PC storefront, we actually got 11 accessibility feature tags, which is really, really good. However, on the other hand, since the console versions both share a single store listing, we were put in a position where we essentially had to adhere to the lowest common denominator between the two versions, and were thus awarded a single accessibility tag, which corresponds to the amount of accessibility features present in the original version of the game. So, although this is not an ideal situation for many reasons, at least we were able to really showcase our entire suite of new features on the PC storefronts. But one realization that we made pretty shortly after completing this exercise was that we actually sell the PC version on a lot more platforms than just the Xbox PC store. In particular, Humble, GOG, and of course Steam. And these storefronts unfortunately don't yet have any sort of accessibility tag system built into their platforms. So essentially we came to the realization, well, how the heck are our players supposed to know what accessibility features are available to them and whether they will play the game or not if they buy our product from anywhere else other than the Xbox storefronts? And we started to think about ways that we could remedy this, and we looked for a way where we could kind of have a platform agnostic method of making accessibility features a really core part of the shopping experience for players, no matter where they buy our games from. So one thing that we realized all of the storefronts have in common is a really nice description section, and it's often called the long description. And we kind of really zeroed in on this section having really high potential to help us solve this user experience problem. But, and where the rest of this kind of talk is going to go, is that we needed to find the best way to approach this. One goal that we really had in mind was coming up with a system that was easily replicable with anyone with a desire to do so, whether they're in Xbox Game Studio or not. So we first needed to figure out how to even categorize, our range of accessibility options. And so we're going to look at that first. And just as a kind of a primer on this, everything that will follow is going to be completely derived from the absolutely wonderful and open source accessibility feature tags documentation, which you can find at aka.ms/accessibility gaming metadata. The reason why I mention this is because in terms of this dream of having this be becoming perhaps a standardized system, or at least one that was easily replicable between individuals and titles, having something that was open source was really key in achieving this vision. If it's something that you can't access openly, then that makes it a lot harder for people to adopt. So in terms of these categories that are included in the accessibility feature tags documentation, we're really lucky, because they already do a marvelous job at categorization, and they include categories for gameplay, audio, visual, and input. Furthermore, if you've ever worked with the accessibility feature tags before, you know that there's an additional accessibility info rubric, which corresponds to basically whether your game has a URL that people can visit to learn more about the accessibility features. We didn't in our case, but one other thing that we suggest adding as well when you're writing your accessibility features is, including a optional miscellaneous category that could be considered in the event that something just doesn't fit nicely, amongst the big four, if you want to call them that. So to get started, once we figured out what the categories were, we really needed to figure out the best way to write out each individual feature description. And so we actually built directly upon, again, the foundation of the feature tags documentation. If you view the details of any of the rubrics, you'll see something like this. So custom volume controls, fantastic. That's a great start. However, one thing that we found was in terms of the player really understanding what they were getting from a feature, just having custom volume controls wasn't necessarily enough to really know if it was going to meet their needs or not. So the approach that we took was to essentially take this foundation, using the key wording of the feature tag itself, and then naturally concatenating that further level of detail that would really benefit the player. So in our case, custom volume controls can be adjusted for master, music, sound effects, voices, and menu audio. And that really helps a lot in kind of understanding the extent of the feature that we're offering. And we repeated this process with our other features compared to their relevant tags. For example, game can be paused. Cool. But how about game can be paused both during gameplay and cinematics? It gives a way better indication of what's available. So basically we ended up with this core structure that consists of the accessibility tag keyword plus the exact details that pertain to it in the context of the game itself. Let's look at a couple more examples. So full keyboard support, allowing the game to be entirely played with keyboard. Arrow keys replace mouse and right stick movement, also taking the time to mention those little caveats so that the player really understands what is being offered. Adjustable input sensitivity for controller, joystick, and mouse axes, and the ability to invert the camera axes. So we're starting to get the hang of it by now on how to process these, generally speaking. However, one really major question that we faced in our process was, what happens if we have a feature in our game that is not part of the accessibility feature tag rubrics? And we had a little bit of debate over whether to include these or not, but we really overwhelmingly found that the benefits to the players so drastically outweighed any sense of perfect alignment with the tag rubrics. So in our case, this really manifested for our mono sound feature, which has no feature tag in the accessibility feature tag documentation. But lucky for us, by now we are quite familiar with the standard formatting that these go through, to the point where we can actually make our own that really follows suit with the rest. So in our case, audio output can be adjusted between stereo and mono sound modes. Sweet. So we can now repeat this process and our bases will be covered for really any scenario. So one thing that we want to look at as well is, some special considerations that we had to make in regards to how we refer to things within these accessibility feature descriptions. In particular, one thing that you're going to come across a lot is, how do I refer to player-facing values which they would see within the game? It's going to come up in every single one. And we opted for name capitalization to really clearly call these out so that when reading our descriptions, the player is then able to immediately know what value can be adjusted in the game itself. So in our case, in the case of subtitle background types, subtitle backgrounds can be adjusted between transparent or solid black. Now there's another really, really juicy subject to tackle, and that's how to best represent any sort of nomenclature which could potentially be seen as subjective. And perhaps there is no better example of this than how we name difficulties. Easy, normal, hard. And in a lot of ways, with what we know about accessibility and difficulty and everyone having different thresholds, who are we to say what is normal or what is hard, right? It changes for everyone. So to handle the representation of this sort of terminology, we actually opted to always contain these terms within inverted commas or single quotes, if you want to call them that. So in practice, that looks something like this. So adjustable combat difficulty between dynamically adjusted auto mode or manually selected easy, medium, or hard modes. And it makes it really, really clear that, hey, these are subjective terms that we've used. Another great example of this sort of terminology would be something like font sizing, where if you think about it, terms like standard and large, they don't correspond to any universally understood metrics of font sizing. So it makes sense to treat those names very similarly to this. Now, obviously, it could be argued that the best option would be to address this sort of terminology directly in the game itself, but as you might know, it's often not as easy said as done. So this is a great method to have in the case where you're not able to adjust those in the game itself. So the very last part of what we're going to talk about today is just give you a quick overview of kind of what the road to publication looks like. From the first step of you wanting to do this all the way to you actually publishing it on your storefronts, this is what it'll look like. So it is an 8-step process. And the first one is just going to be to really, if you are in a position where you're either already published or are about to publish and you've received the kind of the listing of feature tags that are applicable to your title, start with those, note those down. If you're not quite there yet, it's going to be really helpful to get ready for it by simply cross-checking with the accessibility feature tags documentation against your feature set and see which ones you think that you will succeed in. Once that's done, it's really important to perform an overall audit of your title to look for any accessibility features that are not part of the feature tags and to make note of those as well. And then step 3 really just involves bringing them both together and creating your write-up according to the formatting rules that we talked about today already. Then is going to become a bit of a validation trifecta of steps. So the first is going to be to want to validate this with people who will essentially be able to verify whether the claims that you're making are true or not. In our case, we reached out to our Xbox accessibility team as well as Studio Quality to give them a chance to weigh in on what and also how we were reporting the features that we were going to showcase in this regard. After that, there's likely going to be someone in your organization, and this is going to change from company to company, but you're going to have somebody who is typically responsible for actually publishing the store descriptions on your storefronts. In our case, we have a release management team, but this is basically going to be a case of just giving this person a heads up that, hey, we want to do this. It's been validated. Just a heads up that this is potentially coming down the pipe. The last step of validation is going to be kind of getting your green light from the upper level stakeholders if they were not a part of the previous groups. In your case, this could be a studio director or a marketing director, that sort of thing. The reason for doing this is because the storefront is a pretty high stakes facet of your product, so it's always good to perform due diligence here and to get buy-in, especially before the next stage, which is localization. Now, one of the great advantages of this entire system is how cheap it is. You can do this all yourself. You can write the descriptions yourself. You don't need anyone to support you in this. But at the localization stage is where the cost is going to come in. It's really the only cost of the entire process. And why it's needed is because it's very likely that you have your store product page in other languages than English or the one that is your native tongue or that you wrote it in. So it's going to be really important so that people with accessibility needs from other cultures can also benefit from getting this. So finally, you're going to publish, and that's pretty much the end of it. And yeah, I really invite you from this point to consider making this small investment in your titles. It's a really simple, it's a really economical solution to a barrier that many of our players have faced for a really long time. And with this gesture, hopefully we can further our mission of making gaming for everyone. Thank you so much. If you want to take this offline, feel free to reach to me on Twitter. I'd love to talk more or see you in chat as well. So thank you so much for joining today. Bye.
I'll be honest. So when we were having the discussions internally about the store and the description, this whole thing basically started with, I think Dorian just sent an email that was like, we've got a lot of goodness that people don't know about if they're not on Xbox and they can't see the tags. And then it became a larger conversation of, wait, there's a lot of goodness besides the tags. And then we did think pretty long and hard about like what we should put, how we should put it, the order. And again, we were lucky enough that we had the Xbox accessibility tags that we could kind of use as a framework. And we're hoping that this can inspire other people to put more in-depth descriptions in their product pages as well, because we think it's really helpful. And hopefully sharing the process that we went through and Dorian putting it all together gives you some ideas on how you could do it on your own. So we are going to be taking another short break, and then we're going to be coming back for our next micro talk, which is an introduction to the SpecialEffect dev kit. So I will see you at 5 after. Thank you. All right. Hope you guys had a good break. I did see on Twitter that Adam posting the picture of his cup of tea and his Battenberg cake. So thank you so much for having the official food of the Game Accessibility Conference. All right, rolling into our next talk. Very excited to share this one. This is an introduction to the SpecialEffect Dev Kit. The Dev Kit is a series of videos created for game developers who are looking to improve the motor accessibility of their game. This talk will share some background on the creation of the Dev Kit and will also help those interested to get started using it. Let's check it out.
Hi, I'm Bill Donegan. Thank you for inviting me to speak about the SpecialEffect Dev Kit today. I'm the projects manager at SpecialEffect, and I work with the team to help maintain and develop our current projects and help new projects to get started, which has been the case with the SpecialEffect Dev Kit. The Dev Kit is a series of videos created for game developers who are looking to improve the motor accessibility of their game. This talk will share some background on the creation of the Dev Kit and will hopefully also help those interested to feel more comfortable to get started using it. To start, I'll give an overview of our work to give some background on where the Dev Kit has come from. My dad, Dr. Mick Donegan, founded the charity in 2007, the main aims being to, firstly, use customised controllers to improve the motor accessibility of video games for players, and secondly, to utilise eye gaze technology to support patients who have become completely paralysed to interact with a PC using eye movement alone. These were two fields of work that Mick had seen the need for more to be done in, and the reason he founded SpecialEffect. Access to video games and eye gaze technology continue to be the focus of our work today and often converge within projects. The team at SpecialEffect is made up of a service delivery team who carry out the project work, an admin team who help to fulfill the projects and keep things running, and a fundraising and communications team who ensure we are able to carry out our projects and also share our work by talking to game studios and others. Next, I'll briefly go through our current projects. The Lone Library helps players find ways to access and enjoy video games when using a standard game controller is difficult or impossible. As well as creating a custom hardware and software setup for players, we often make use of the features, options and settings in games that are related to motor accessibility. We provide an ongoing lifetime support as people's needs and interests change. We share information on controller solutions and options, settings and game accessibility features, often through videos on our gameaccess.info site. Our Stargaze project carries out the assessment and support of people who are in intensive care due to a serious injury or illness that results in the loss of their ability to communicate or control technology. We help people to be able to communicate in person and online and access the computer for leisure, including eye gaze technology. eyegazegames.com is a website of browser-based games that we have created. The site aims to fill a gap for eye gaze users by providing easy-to-set-up games which are accessible to a wide range of users on a wide range of eye gaze systems. We created a user interface with Kirsty McNaught called iMine. To enable eye gaze users to play Minecraft, we provide support for individual players and offer periodic support and updating of the software itself to enable iMine to continue to be successfully used. Bubblebusters helps children who are in isolation for extended periods with cancer. A telepresence robot is used to take the child's place in the classroom, allowing them to hear, see, and speak to their friends and teacher from their home or hospital bed using a tablet. Within the project, we are also exploring offering access to telepresence devices for those using assistive technology, such as eye gaze. Because of our work in both access to video games and using eye gaze, we are sometimes approached by hardware, software, and game developers looking for feedback on the development of their products. Some examples we can mention include the MyGaze Assistive Eye Gaze Camera by SMI, the Xbox Adaptive Controller, the Logitech Adaptive Kit, and the game Sea of Thieves by Rare. We both share the knowledge of the team and arrange for those we work with to speak directly to developers as appropriate. We'll cover a couple of examples of how we have supported game developers to improve the motor accessibility of their games. We worked with Co-op to add a mouse accessibility support mode to their game Nog on PC. It is a puzzle game that requires you to explore virtual toys. Co-op added a mode that allows players using a mouse or assistive cursor control devices, such as eye gaze, to interact more easily with the game. For instance, you need to rotate the monsters back and forth to complete puzzles on either side of them. By default, use the right mouse click, but with the mouse accessibility mode enabled, you can move your cursor below a monster and an interface will appear allowing you to click an arrow instead. This removes the need to change between click types when using a device like eye gaze. Similarly, to remove the need to drag items, the mode allows you to click once to grab an item, then click again to let it go, instead of holding click down. To remove the need to use the escape key to open the menu, an on-screen menu button was added to the top left of the screen, again keeping the controls to cursor movement and a single left click. In addition to the launch options which helped inform players of the mode, they also published some information on the update online. They said, "Over the past year we've been working with SpecialEffect. We're happy to announce an accessibility mode for Nog. Launching the game in this mode changes the interaction model. You click once to grab an object, then click again to let it go. It's a subtle change, but it allows players using assistive point-and-click devices, such as eye gaze control, to more easily interact with the puzzles we created." The next example is Sea of Thieves, which Rare added many accessibility features to following its release. Certain actions, such as dropping the anchor, loading a cannon, or repairing the hull, require players to hold an input down for the duration of the action. They added the Reduce Hold to Interact option that allows players to complete these actions with only an initial press of the input instead. You wait for the same duration for the action to complete, but don't need to hold the input for that duration. They also added a Sticky Radial Items option, which allows players to use the left stick direction to highlight an option, then release it if they wish, and the option will remain highlighted until they confirm selection, rather than needing to maintain a hold of it as is the default. They also added the Play with a single analog stick option, where you can use just the left or right stick rather than both to look and move. Additional associated options were also added to accompany this option to use it successfully in-game. James Thomas, who is the lead engineer at Rare, said of the settings, "On Sea of Thieves, we worked on reducing input complexity when sailing the seas. This includes toggleable menus, auto-movement, auto-completing actions, and a single stick mode. SpecialEffect provided valuable guidance and feedback as we strive to improve accessibility at Rare." After we reached out, they offered initial suggestions, other games to look at for examples, and valuable feedback on pre-release versions. Hopefully that overview of our work has given some background into where SpecialEffect's experiences stem from with our day-to-day work at the charity. Next we'll move on to the dev kit itself and why we made it. There were two main reasons we created the dev kit. One was that we felt it was an important time to share what we've learnt through our work when accessibility in video games is gathering so much momentum. The second was that we wanted a resource that the team could use when supporting studios with improving the motor accessibility of their games. We wanted to use videos to help show examples of how other developers have overcome accessibility barriers in order to help them to understand these, to be able to use similar solutions, or become comfortable enough to create their own accessibility solutions for their own games that they know inside out. The first step in creating the dev kit was to decide how to structure the site and videos and group associated options, settings and gameplay features together, which my colleague Francis worked on creating. The next step was to choose and divide game examples into these. Francis then created the scripts to fit the games we had chosen, and we had a working rough video edit of the game capture, with placeholder voiceovers by our colleague Liz, to get a feel for the flow of each video and how clearly the examples worked. We then worked with Cara, who is the video maker who creates the game access videos for us on the final videos. There was then a lot of back and forth swapping out clips and games, adjusting the script right until the very end. As mentioned, we wanted to group associated accessibility related features together, so we ended up with 7 topics. Input devices looks at how the devices you decide to support and how they are handled will greatly affect which players are able to play. Action mapping covers ways that allowing players to configure the specific input that's mapped to each action lets them use the inputs that are the most accessible to them. Input interactions looks at the importance of allowing players to configure the interactions where possible, and to provide alternatives to more complicated interactions that some players may find difficult. Analog sensitivity looks at how letting players configure the relationship between the value the game receives from the analog input and the value the corresponding action takes lets players customize the game's controls in a way that works for them. Information covers how the amount of information you're able to provide and how that information is presented will affect how easy it is for the player to find a way to play that suits them. Assistance looks at how, whilst games are often designed to have a certain level of challenge, allowing players to enable optional assists that alters the experience allows players to find a suitable individual level of challenge. And simplification covers how, beyond assisting the player in various ways, you might also provide options that simplify the game experience. Each video shows examples of how game developers have created solutions to improve the motor accessibility of their games in ways related to that topic. Each topic can be watched as one full-length video, which includes all of its modules, which are like chapters. They can also be watched as separate modules, which are accessed from the menu. Having modules available as standalone videos allows us, and teams within studios, to point others more directly to a specific area related to their game or a developer's role within a team. To show how we use game examples to illustrate an area of motor accessibility, I'll finish with an example module, which is the automatic analog actions module from within the simplification topic.
Automatic analog actions. Allow players to automate certain analog actions in a specific or optimal way. In a similar way to automating digital actions, analog actions can also be automated. Analog actions, however, can take any number of values, so you will need to decide how best to automate them given the current actions available in your game. You might decide to let players configure how analog actions are performed in a specific way, or you might have them be performed in an optimal way instead. For example, you might let the player move on a set or predetermined path to reach a particular destination. Once activated, the game will adjust the player's movements to keep them on the path. In Red Dead Redemption 2, you can set a waypoint on the map and hold a button to have the character automatically follow roads and paths to get there, while in cinematic camera mode. In Forza Motorsport 7, the highest level of steering assist will guide the driver's steering to keep them near the optimal driving line. Though it won't alter the path in response to other vehicles, it can allow for races to be completed without the player having to manually steer. In a similar way to this, you could also have an option to alter the path of the player to avoid obstacles or areas that might slow them down. If the player is going to collide with something and might not be able to move an analog input quickly enough to avoid it, have the player automatically steer around it. In Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, enabling smart steering will mean that when the player nears the edge of the track or an area that will slow them down, the smart steering will activate and alter the path of the player to keep them on the track. Some games, third-person games in particular, have an action that automatically recenters the camera with the press of a button, which usually adjusts it to face the direction the player's character is facing. This might make handling the camera easier in some situations, as the camera can now be partially controlled without the need for an analog input. But as with digital actions, you could also automate analog actions in response to other actions. So as an alternative to resetting the camera manually, you could have the option to have the camera automatically adjust itself when the character attacks, for example, like God of War allows you to do. Or perhaps you might continuously update the direction of the camera to point in the direction that the character is moving. Spyro Reignited Trilogy has the option to change the camera from passive to active, which means the camera will continually readjust itself to face the direction Spyro is moving. Including this option in third-person games can be especially beneficial for players who have difficulty using two analog sticks at the same time. The Last of Us Part 2's camera assist option will reorient the camera in the direction of the player's movement, and also allows you to limit the assistance to a single axis if preferred. Though less common, you could also automatically move the camera in a first-person game. Sea of Thieves, for instance, has an auto-center camera option that automatically returns the camera to the horizon after a specified delay, minimizing the amount that the player needs to manually move the camera. As with automating digital actions, another benefit of automating analog actions might be to prevent the player from having to perform otherwise complex input interactions. In Outer Wilds, if you enable the autopilot feature, it can then be used to travel to a planet in an optimal direction and at an optimal speed throughout the journey. The player locks onto the planet they want to travel to, activates the autopilot, and the ship then automatically adjusts various aspects of its motion to arrive at the planet. This replaces what might be a set of complex analog movements with a single press of an input. This module is a part of simplification. Discover other modules in this topic on the SpecialEffect DevKit website at specialeeffectdevkit.info.
Hopefully this talk and watching that example module has given you some background to the SpecialEffect DevKit and help you feel more comfortable to start using it if you're interested. You can visit specialeeffectdevkit.info to do this. Thank you very much for your time.
I think all of us agree that one of the best parts of the dev kit is the sheer amount of examples that they have put together in one place for you to be able to learn about. And the instruction that is describing what is happening paired with the in-game examples really takes these examples and makes them really easy to understand. I mean, as Nebula was just saying in chat here, that was just one single module from the full dev kit. And I feel like so many of us saw so much and again got to see already existing great examples of these accessibility features in games. And so I highly recommend that you check it out. The link to the dev kit is in Discord. It has also been pinned so you can't lose track of it. All of the videos are amazing, so be sure to check that out. So again, it's time for us to have a short break, and then we'll be back with our last micro talk of the day. So I will see you. Oh, hi, Leon. Guess who's back? Yeah. Did you like the dev kit? Yeah. Was it good? Anyway, yes, please take a short break. We'll be back in just over 5 minutes for our last micro talk of the day. Thank you. All right. And now we are rolling into our last micro talk of the day. Now, I want to go ahead and give a shout out for this one because look, someone was a little nervous when they had no right to be. There was definitely a bit of doubting themselves, which was not warranted. Okay. And you're going to see it in this talk, a perspective from the spectrum. So in this talk, it's going to be a brief discussion on the difficulties of interactions and behaviors that may be problematic for those on the spectrum when attempting to make connections, and the tools that are used that we overlook that can help us navigate uncomfortable situations in the gaming world. So let's check it out.
Good afternoon. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Before we continue, I just want to state that this is very overwhelming for me, and I'm having a little bit of imposter syndrome going on in my head right now. So just bear with me, sit back, and enjoy the talk.
Text on screen reads, "The following presentation is based on my personal experience and may contain triggering subject matter. This video is to show you that you are not alone. I am here with you."
Before I even start telling you about myself, my story, or what I'm doing, I have an exercise that I would love for you guys to take part in with me. Bear with me for a moment, and each slide that comes up, I'd like you to take a look and just in your head think about the first thing you notice about this person, or what you assume from looking at that person. So in this first slide, for me, this person has brown eyes. It's the first thing I see. In this next slide, this person has dark hair. In this slide, to me, the first thing I see is this person is of color or black. And in this last slide, I'm assuming this person is Scottish, since she has those beautiful flowing red hair. Now, the point of that exercise is the things that you've looked at. These are just attributes that people are born with. In society, we don't go out of our way to give people who have brown eyes or a big nose special treatment. There is an imaginary line that we draw where we decide that these people that we wholly accept are over here, and everyone else past this line are people that we don't. Is the line something that we draw when someone else makes us uncomfortable? Or when we are uncomfortable with ourselves for being uncomfortable when we shouldn't be? Do we suddenly decide to draw that line when we are making someone else uncomfortable? But here's the thing. I'm uncomfortable all the time. And the thing is, there are days where I feel like I've been uncomfortable almost all my life. I live in a constant state of emotional anxiety. My brain is always buzzing with overstimulating thoughts. Is the easiest way to explain it. One of the most difficult things for me is social interactions. Sounds, colour, movement, all things that provide distractions, as I'm constantly in a state of analysing what is going on, just baffle my mind. But the biggest thing for me is there's a constant blind spot in my social awareness, causing me to push social boundaries, and this often makes people uncomfortable. This is where things get interesting, because as a child, I had to become hyper aware of micro-expressions, and I have studied the emotional reactions of people around me all my life. And I have absolutely had to become somewhat of an expert on being able to tell when I make somebody uncomfortable. You may be able to sort of guess or have the ability to know when a statement is going to be taboo before you say it. Whereas I have to make the statement to learn that it's going to be taboo after I say it. And then what I do is try to figure out how to make things better for other people around me. And repair the damage that's done after I cross that imaginary line. Funny enough, there are people out there that are not on the spectrum that do this. Comedians specifically do this. They go out their way to make you feel uncomfortable so that we can all have a laugh. You know, whether it's a heckler in the crowd or whether they're just discussing the social norms of our society at any given point. The idea is to bring that to your attention, understand it, and then laugh about it and how ridiculous it is as a community. I guess where I'm going with this is humans need social connections. It doesn't seem to matter whether you have brown eyes, whether you have bright flowing red locks of red hair, you still have an innate, instinctual need to be with other people who love and accept you for who you are. But when you spend most of your life uncomfortable around other people and uncomfortable thinking about how you make other people feel, as well as overly aware of everything that is always happening around you all the time, whether it's something you can control or something you can't, then it becomes one of the most disheartening and miserable experiences, and it becomes something that you cannot escape because it's what you live every day. For myself and many others, this leads down a very, very dark path. You feel isolated, there's depression, and in cases like my own, self-harm and suicide attempts. The worse it gets, obviously, the more it hurts, whether you're acknowledging that emotional trauma or not. Now, I'm not just spouting my experiences here. There's scientific evidence to back this up. Because there was a famous article that came out in the New York Times in 1988 that was reported on the study conducted by Harry Harlow and psychoanalysts John Bowlby and Rennie Spitz. I'm not sure if I'm saying John's name correctly. The work was focused on explaining the long-known syndrome in which infants deprived of direct human contact grow slowly and even die. And there is a link to that article that I can provide you with a bit later if you wish. No one wants to be embraced because they're different, which is exactly how most people try to solve their problems. We have quotas to fill for hiring practice, a certain number of females, a certain number of people of colour, a certain number of disabled people, etc., etc. Now, if you know the article, think about these infants. We don't pick them up and hold them because they don't have parents, or their parents can't hold them. We don't hold them because they are different. We pick them up and hold them because they are infants, and it's our instinct to nurture them, to love them, to protect them, for who they are in that moment. Whether you want children or not, whether you have a maternal instinct or not, there is some point in your life, in your career, where you have nurtured someone, not because they are different, but because you genuinely care and you want to bring them into an environment where they feel safe and they can grow. I mean, as we grow up, everyone wants to find a place where they fit in as they are without changing their core concept. To find a group of people who have a common interest. Notice I said interest, not skin color or disability. Everyone wants to find a place where they can go and be wholly completed and wholly and completely accepted for who they are. This is especially true today, as more and more people, children and adults, coming forward with their struggles due to the pandemic. Therapists and doctors are discovering a general worldwide universal link that people from all walks of life are beginning to suffer from their isolation and struggle with being disconnected from their social environments. A study that included many researchers entitled "The Role of Social Connection on the Experience of COVID-19 Related Post-Traumatic Growth and Stress," a very long title I know, but bear with me, has shown that much like the infants we previously discussed, people of all ages and races in every country have proven that having access to caring, supportive social connections has a range of benefits from mental and physical health. The article goes on to discuss how the lack of support is linked to depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. Now you have a rough idea of what I'm talking about and know some of the struggles that I've encountered in my life. And now you know that being autistic doesn't make me unique, since there are so many people everywhere who are silently suffering with the lack of something as simple as human contact. We already have a solution. For me, tabletop games was a way to have a social connection with others that began with everyone at the table having something in common, and ended with an amazing feeling of being supported, cheered on, and most importantly, accepted. I found a place where I could escape the constant barrage of uncomfortableness that was being bombarded with every single interaction on a daily basis. I found a freedom and joy in being in a place where everyone was embraced for who they were in the moment. Not because they were different or because I was different, but because we all had something in common. There is no anxiety when you walk to a table and everyone that at that table has something in common. When everyone at that table has no expectations from anyone else than to simply engage in a game that has a simple set of rules and a clear guidelines for social interaction, when no one worries about needing or expecting anything from each other. That to me is connection. That to me is true inclusion. And we can do it with gaming, all gaming, not just board games, tabletop games, or digital games. I strongly believe that humans developed games as a way to teach and to impose wisdom on each other, as a way to bring each other up and understand things and empathize in new ways, in new creative and imaginative ways. They're amazing tools that we undervalue within our society now. I mean, these bonds that we create as we interact in a certain set of circumstances leave all of us feeling energized and optimistic. This is like a universal feeling that all of us have when we create meaningful and empowering connections with people. And it's something that isn't unique. It is an adventure that is shared between a band of people that are all growing together. If I can discover this feeling, that means that anyone else can. And it was this realization that made me decide that I need to empower people all over the world to find their niche, to find their tribe, to find their people that they click with. I started Kagai Games in its current form in 2017 with the goal of making tabletop experiences for everyone that resonate with great stories, mechanics, and social experiences. These tools are specifically designed to build and create social dynamics that facilitate making friends, building relationships, and creating memories for people that everyone can talk about. This evolved, and I discovered making tabletop games was just a small part of the picture. I needed to live as an example of what I wanted to achieve. So I started volunteering at the National Autistic Society in 2018, a charity here in the UK. And then, by extension, other charities like Scope, as a consultant. In 2020, I started streaming on Twitch, the idea being to bring people together not only so I could self-publish my tabletop games to an audience that shared the same values, but to create experiences in digital games that really enforced the values of learning and experiencing strong social connections. Now I have a TikTok, a Twitch, a YouTube, as well as working with Scope and other charities. All of this while continuing to build tabletop experiences and games. Kagai Games has become my way of building social interactions that leave people with not only understanding of what it's like to be on the spectrum, but how empowering it is to help others and build a community of people who understand just each other through open communication and inclusive content. Open discussions without judgment in controlled situations are so reinforcing to that connection that we feel, because you do not feel like you are judged anymore. Games that guide experiences like D&D, Pathfinder, and other tabletop games that teach empathy through role-playing are just some of the core tools at our disposal out there. The tools that are most powerful, I suppose, are the tools that get us talking. Dungeons and Dragons, the tabletop RPG where a group of players build and tell stories, for decades has been a game that makes and breaks friendships. But the tool itself has become incredible for empowering people that have a different viewpoint to source their favorite material from popular media, literature, and their own imaginations to experience life through the eyes of someone else. This tool, if applied correctly, is a powerful way of bringing people out of isolation. Everything we discussed earlier is left behind. Your skin color, your eye color, where you're from, male or female, if you have one arm or two, and the game progression together is what happens at the table. These tools are what inspires me and in turn the company I'm building. Kagai Games are built for moments like this, to provide inclusive content that those who grew up like me have something to identify with, then empower them to look past the common physical and mental similarities to use the games and stories as tools to build their social safety net. And bit by bit, that loneliness fades away. You gain the information to identify and hopefully understand what it is and how you can empower yourself, and then the real journey to include others begins. Gamers create experiences that form bridges between people. Of course, these tools that help me create social dynamics and facilitate meaningful relationships and connections are something that can be built into any game, regardless of the platform, or whether it's something that is digital or hard copy or just spoken from one person to the other. Regardless, I hope my story inspires you to do this with your games as well, and figure out how, rather than targeting a demographic based on the disability they have, you can target a demographic based on the story they want to experience, and know that the changes you made to the hardware, while yes, granting accessibility, is the changes we need to make to the mentality that will provide the biggest difference to everyone out there. And before I go, I would love you to take a moment to think about this. When was the last time you took part in an activity on your own and played something that brought you together with somebody new? Somebody you had never met. Somebody who, after you finished that activity you were doing, you discovered something about them that made you really want to stay connected. That you enjoyed the activity enough with them that time just flew. Don't we all just want that? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that talk. As everyone is already saying in chat, absolutely love this. Lovely job. Solid. Brilliant stuff. Amazing. What an amazing talk. Wow, incredible. Great talk. Thank you so much. Thank you. And this is coming in faster than I can read it. Ian, you smell. How dare you ruin that string of good comments by putting that I smell into the chat. Rude. Anyway, no. I want to thank Barrington for the honesty and openness and the raw feeling that was put in. There were so many in the chat who talked about how it resonated with them, how they felt seen. And I loved this one quote that you had. Gamers create experiences that form bridges between people. Games can build that social connection. And you're absolutely right. We have to start thinking in a new way to be more inclusive. Again, I absolutely loved it. And I know that you were a little nervous, but I think everyone agrees that for your first game accessibility conference talk, you absolutely killed it. Very, very well done. So it is now time for us to take a break. We will be back at 5 after, and then we will be getting ready to do our last talks of the day. We are getting very close to finishing the end of day 1. So please take the short break, rest up, tell Barrington how great they did in chat because they were hiding. All right. See you after the break. All right. And that concludes our last break of the day, meaning that our last long break. Obviously, we'll have a short one in between the talks, but we are officially in the last segment of day one for today, home stretch. So we're going to be having our next talk, A Typical Gamer. This is a quick dive into the adaptations used by 3 regular gamers at Everyone Can's Accessible Gaming Center. Each gamer will help to demonstrate how far from the default control schemes can and sometimes have to be pushed, but also highlight new technologies and the impact they are having. This talk is intended to be a positive reminder of progress made, as well as influence design choices for games and their peripherals. Let's check it out.
Hello, I'm Andrew from the charity Everyone Can. I always think it's best to start these talks by introducing both myself and the organisation I work for. I feel it's important to explain where my perspectives and my experiences come from. I identify as neurologically diverse. I also support disabled members of my family. I work for the charity Everyone Can. I'm an assessor for that charity. That means I can be sent across the country to meet individuals and discuss with them what equipment they may need in their day-to-day life. I also manage the adaptations in our centre. The charity itself deals in assistive technology for computer access, environmental control, communication for people that don't meet NHS criteria, but we're best known now for gaming. We do gaming assessments. We also have a digital accessibility centre based in Sale, Manchester, where we run every week completely free gaming sessions for disabled children and adults. It's members that come to those sessions that I would like to talk about today. So before I go on, let's talk a little bit about what this talk's going to be about. I would like to present 3 gamers that come to our centre and talk about how their adaptations may be different from how developers expect their games to be played. Hence why I chose the title of this talk. I was hoping it would be a little bit diversive. It might create a conversation piece, but to be honest, a typical gamer, the word typical only really means what is to be expected. And I think it's fair to say that our gamers aren't the control scheme users that most developers would expect. And that's why I'd like to talk about them. Hopefully, if you're a game developer, you'll get an insight into how other people could be playing your games, and that may influence the control schemes that you use. If you are an advocate, there may be a new piece of technology that I'm going to be talking about towards the end that you may not have seen properly demonstrated before, and it's an exciting piece, and it kind of shows how industries are changing. So without further ado, I think it's time to talk about our first gamer. So this will be our first gamer for today. Unfortunately, due to the charity's data protection policies and dealing with vulnerable adults and children, we're very careful when it comes to either showing a picture of someone or showing their name. So I will be just referring to people as gamers for this talk, and I'm going to try my absolute best not to have to edit how many times I say their names out too much. So this is our first gamer. He's the youngest of our gamers that I'll be talking about today, and he's also the only one that is able to use a joystick and control his own wheelchair. Being a joystick gamer, it's the easiest to set him up, and so we're starting easily. He mostly uses joysticks that emulate the kind of joystick on his wheelchair. We try and go for the same tactile feel. However, he has used a lot of arcade joysticks in the past, and we connect that joystick to an Xbox adaptive controller, as I'm sure you expected. In the photos that I've provided on the screen, you can see that we've used a combination of different systems with him. We have mounted switches, and for those that are not familiar with the physical adaptation side of disabilities, switches can come in a multitude of different forms, from being sound devices to being sensors that detect movement. But in this talk, when I'm referring to switches for these gamers, I really do just mean a really big button. So if you're not able to see those pictures, just picture really big buttons, and that should be fine. So we have mounted switches to his wheelchair using Manfrotto arms, and they're a type of photography mounting system. We use them a lot because they're incredibly robust, and they're designed to carry £40,000 worth of fragile photography equipment and lenses. So to control a single button, it's going to be more than strong enough. However, that is really situational based on the individual's chair. So not only has this gamer had switches mounted on arms, which is very typical, but we also try different lap trays with him, and when we have opportunity and we know in advance what game he wants to go on first, we'll have a drum stand set up. In the photo on the right hand side, he's actually positioned at a drum stand where we have mounted the adaptations on arms ready to go. Being the most mobile of our gamers, he's also the one with the shortest attention span for setup. So it's very important that when he arrives, we have something ready for him to play, ready for him to go, or he will wheel round and drive to the next station, and it becomes a game of chasing him round to try and get a game set up before he gets bored and moves on to the next one. In terms of interface, we use the standard switches, we use a relatively standard joystick for us, and we use primarily the Xbox adaptive controller. In the photo on the right hand side, you can see that he has both a Xbox adaptive controller placed on the floor, which he's currently connected to, and mounted onto the drum stand is actually the Hori Flex controller, which is a lesser known adaptive controller, and one that I have struggled to use in the center, quite frankly, due to limitations on the device. It is a very powerful device, but up until very, very recently was limited into what joysticks it would acknowledge, mostly limiting to their own brand and models. That's recently been patched or changed in a software update. I've not had time to explore that yet much myself. However, it's really nice and refreshing to see that they are making steps to make their accessible device more actually accessible, and that has come directly as a result of pressure and complaints about the device. Primarily, we still recommend the Xbox adaptive controller, mostly because it's much easier to configure for a lot of people. It works very well. The advantages of having additional buttons on the main device itself is kind of not that relevant when you're mostly going to be using it as an interface to then lead to switches positioned around the person. And also the price point. The Hori Flex controller is a premium product, whereas the Xbox adaptive controller is also a premium product, but also potentially wireless and also much cheaper. It's priced around £15 more than a standard controller, and the HoriFlex controller is around £160. To put that into perspective, you can, if you wanted to use the Xbox adaptive controller on a Nintendo Switch, the kind of adapter you would need to make that work or make that possible is about £12. So not only are you immediately ready to go with that setup, but you also get the benefit of it working then with other devices as well at a cheaper price point. So that's the way we lean primarily. But it's important to have a look at everything. As one technology develops, it inspires competitors to then look at what they're doing and try and improve. One of the things that we use a lot in the center is the Switch kits designed by Logitech, the Logitech G Series adaptive gaming kit, I believe. And they are brilliant, if only because they have massively reduced the price of what a traditional Switch would cost. So a Switch for accessibility, a single round, we refer to them as jelly bean switches because they're the kind of, I'm not sure if they're the industry leader, but that is just that's the one everyone thinks of. And so we'll just recall it a jelly bean switch, a bit like Branston pickle is any kind of brown pickle. They're about this size, and they would cost, for accessibility, £30 each, minimum. Now, through the Logitech G gaming site, you can buy a set of 12, which has 3 of them, 3 of a smaller size, 4 micro finger switches, and 2 larger pedal style switches that are fully analog, and this comes in at £90. So it's very, very competitive, but better yet, it's encouraged other gaming hardware developers to question whether, well, hang on, that seems expensive, couldn't we make switches? And other organizations that we're talking to are considering the idea of making their own switches as just a offshoot of what they already do, because they have the capacity to do so, and it could do some good for the world. So that's a very, very nice thing. Now, in terms of the games that this gamer plays, he is all about the couch co-op. We have simple single switch stations. However, he's not really interested in that kind of thing. We also have VR, which he does take an interest in. And we also have a driving wheel where we have various videos on our social media of him playing alongside his brother on different racing games. But primarily, he is here to play against other gamers, couch co-op, and to take them on an equal footing. So that really is our first gamer. Time to move on to our second gamer. Now, this individual is also a Switch user, but is unable to operate a joystick. Every so often we try him to try and see if he's developing that skill, as there is a very good support team around him trying to help him to be able to use an adaptive wheelchair adaptation so he can be self-steering. However, primarily he uses a single switch. Now, all of the gamers that we're talking about today, they're all non-verbal, and this gamer, when he comes in, because he primarily uses a single switch on his left knee to communicate, he'll quite often come in and then ask to have his communication aid removed so he can play unrestricted by it. Now, that's quite a sad thing, to be honest. The fact that he has to make the choice between being able to communicate and being able to game. It's not a choice that I envy or feel like anyone should have to make. But he is in a position where he will ask us to remove his communication aid, or rather he will ask his carers, because he comes in with a support team. He will ask his carer to remove his communication aid so he can play unimpeded. Now, when it comes to actually gaming, he's a big fan of single switch games. He is a bit of a champion at Ding Dong XL, and he has also played quite a lot of Bubbles the Cat, which I actually found out about from a previous GA conference talk by the developers of that game. Quick shout out for them, and it's definitely worth taking a look at the development of that game. I'm sure it will be on the GA conference archives. Now, he is able to operate more than just a single switch. He is actually incredibly competent when using a multitude of switches. However, it is quite fatiguing for him. So in the photos that we have up at the moment, this was actually him on a break from a project that we were doing. But he's actually sat playing Mario Kart on an Xbox adaptive controller. So as I said earlier, we do use that with the Nintendo Switch primarily. And he's steering with a switch on his left and on his right knee as well, so that he's steering left and right. And he also has head switches across the back of his headrest in order to operate like launch using items and things like that. Now, that's not the most that we've had him set up with. So what we've done with him, which is really pushing the boat out for him in terms of his usage, is we have had him operate 4 switches with his knees. So he has left, right, forward and backwards, and then 4 switches across the back of his head that he uses his head to depress for interactions. So jump, dash, sprint and use. With those kind of setups, he's played games like Human Fall Flat. He's played Cake Bash on the multiplayer couch co-op stations during a gaming session, playing with the other children that are on those stations, and he's able to compete. It is just a lot of work, and it's very tiring for him, but that is how he is able to play, and so trying to refine player movement makes it a lot easier for him to play. If the game doesn't really require multiple analog sticks in order to play, he's able to do it. If there's a good camera mode option, he's able to play it. If it requires a heavy use of 2 analog sticks, he's going to definitely encounter some pretty big barriers in order for him to play. Now, let's move on to our third gamer. And this gamer, he's going to really appreciate me using a kind of older photo from during 2020 of him here. But he is not a Switch user. He is primarily an eye gaze user, and he uses a communication aid to communicate. He is using something a little bit special. So he is using a relatively new device made by Praetorian called the Game On 1. We were actually able to help meet with them and advise with them on certain functions that this device would need and how it would operate in the gaming space. We were quite lucky to be involved in that process and able to help its development. And it is a device that picks up the signals sent out from the environmental control module on his communication device and is able to link that in to either as a controller itself when linked to a computer, or more usefully tied into an Xbox adaptive controller. So how that operates is it takes what would normally be words on his communication screen and replaces them with A, B, left stick up, right trigger, rapid press, things like that. So I'm going to show you a quick kind of video that kind of shows how it works in just a moment. But it's a really interesting and important piece of technology that's just come out. It reflects how the industry is changing the way it looks at gaming. Not only are gaming companies looking now at accessibility for gaming, but also accessibility companies are looking at gaming as an obligation. I don't really believe that Praetorian are going to be making a lot of money off the back of the Game On. I imagine it's more of one of their projects that they make for the community more than for their normal income. But let's show you how that operates. So hopefully this video will start and work. It does. Okay, that's great. So the Game On comes, if you have a grid pad, with options for the controls already on. It comes with 3 pages already set up: basic, intermediate, and advanced. I'm currently showing you the advanced page, and it's a lot to take in. It even has diagonals at my request. Now, it's difficult to use when it's presented to you like this. It's quite overwhelming, but for someone who uses eye tracking and is very, very hot on their communication, it's perfectly possible. However, it's designed to be edited. So each one of those tiles has a infrared signal baked into it, and you can actually edit them. The downside to that is it's also 4-player, so you can have 4 of these modules running side by side. Therefore, you can have 4 gamers playing on the Game On in the same room. A bit like remote control cars, they would fight each other otherwise. So what I'm just going to show you now is a grid set that I've put together, and this is currently how I play Minecraft using the device. This has been set up for me, and so you can see I've adjusted the sizes of the buttons that I use the most and laid them out where it's easiest for me to hit them using eye gaze. Additionally, I've renamed a lot of them to their function in the game, so like place blocks, things like that. And I've also edited the button to bring up inventory to then take you to a new page where you control just moving around the crafting menu and things like that. So I think that's quite important, because this demonstrates as well that you can have a page for navigating the Xbox menu, you can have a page for navigating the menu of your game, and the same button that you press to enter can then lead you into controlling your character. So you can have a quite robust way of moving around in game and then also navigating. So one of the things to bear in mind, though, is both the strength and weakness of the device is it uses the communication module on the communication aid. Sorry, the environmental control module on the communication aid. So what that means is the same function that would come with a high-level device that would control lights or heating or your TV, it uses that. And so effectively you're playing games using a TV remote. The benefit is it's not locked into just being a grid pad. They did get some initial support from Smartbox, who are the makers of grid pads, and the Grid 3, which is this is what it's using, the software, which helped them kind of get a foot in the door to develop the device. And that's why you can just download grid sets all ready to go. However, now that the device is out, they're also talking to Tobii Dynavox and other communication grid manufacturers, and it will already now, if you were to buy it, you can harvest the signals and program any communication device to send them out, which means you could play simple games on a Gawa remote control that's used in almost every care home in the country. You could play games regardless of what eye tracking camera you use, which is a big one. And I'm going to be showing you a quick video of Minecraft, because if I go back to our gamer, he's actually one of the first gamers that I helped assess. He came to us wanting to play Minecraft through eye tracking, and we helped him as best we could with the technology that was available at the time. And now he's back with us, and we're setting him up with the Game On. He's got his own, he's practicing at home. In the near future, we'll be inviting him in for another project. I'll talk about that in a moment. But we're inviting him into the center as well to play on little training modules that we've set up for him, and we're getting him to play Minecraft again. And it's an entirely new world and experience for him, because although the ability to play a form of Minecraft through eye tracking has existed for a while, it had the same pitfalls as a lot of eye tracking enabled games, which is it worked on a set version of the game that was modded or not the generally available version. It also was dependent on you having the correct eye tracking bar. So you could only do it with a Tobii eye tracking bar without jumping through some major hurdles. However, it doesn't matter what eye tracking bar you use. In fact, there's probably... Yeah, in fact, there will be a way of setting it up to use an iPhone as your eye tracking camera and then tie it in. But that's a project for another day. So it's got the big advantage there. The fact that it's the same game as your friend is playing. It's the same game as your friend online is playing. You can attach it to your chair, go around to your friend's house, by just having someone press the pair button on your controller and on the Xbox, you can be playing side by side on the same game. That is a huge change from anything that's come before. It's a huge change and a break away from the traditional eye tracking games that have been available, where it's not been... It's been a good experience, but it's not been the same experience that other people are playing. If you wanted to play a game with eye tracking, you were playing either a watered down version of a game or a very selected, filtered game, or just a separate game altogether. Whereas this lets you play the exact same game. If it's available on Xbox, it can play it. Now, obviously, with it working through the infrared, it can only transmit one signal at a time, which means it's a big problem when you want to press multiple buttons at once. And also, it struggles with very, very fast speeds of transmitting. So you're limited to how quickly you can send the signals. And that's pretty much its limiting factors. However, for the types of gamers this is intended for, they're already limited by how quickly they can interact with their device, among other things. So this is still a huge step up for them. So we're just going to skip back ahead. So this is just a short Minecraft video just to demonstrate the movement. This world was actually created by myself and our third gamer for him just to explore. He did a lot of flying, playing around in creative, mostly caving and things like that. However, I was able to find the foundations of one of the structures that he put together, and so thought it would be a good opportunity and excuse for me to fill it out a little bit and then use this as a chance to show you movement. So I'm going to jump cut until after the structure is built. It's not much, it's just a nice little fishing hut effectively, and you can see how like a long press on the analog stick will give you a full rotation. I apologise for the clipping textures, it's a quirk with the capture device, and you can see that selecting the block that you want to click on is relatively easy. There's also diagonal movement as well. You can sprint and other things. Obviously any button or function on a controller can be emulated through this. I'm also going to spin around and show you a quick glance at my fishing hut as well. So trying to line up for that good photography shot, and as you can see I've overshot, so we'll just jump back and then up, and there we go. Other big advantages of this setup is because it uses the Xbox adaptive controller, you still have access to all the really great functions of it, like if you're able to use a joystick, you can include that with the setup. You're not having to choose one or the other. Same with switches, but more interestingly as well as co-pilot. So this gamer plays a lot of FIFA at the moment, and he does so using this device and then the support of his carers in order to maximize his controls. FIFA is quite a hard game to be playing, at least to start out with. It's something that we're hoping to build him up to be playing independently, but we're trying to start him on games that can travel at a slower pace to start with. And there we go. There's an example of interaction and timings. So I mentioned that we were looking at a new project with this gamer, and it's quite interesting. After I selected him to be a case study in this talk and he agreed, I was at his house supporting him with the game on device, and we got talking, and it turns out he was actually the peer mentor for our second gamer when our second gamer first got his communication device. And he helped him kind of get used to the idea of using one, and also showed him the ropes, as it were. And so they spent a lot of time together 5 or more years ago. Actually, no, much further back than that. Probably about 7 to 8. And so they've not seen each other since. And so I'm arranging something to invite them both to come in, just to hang out, but also we've been approached by we as in the charity Everyone Can, but specifically myself, as I'm familiar with all parties. We've been approached by the speech and language therapists of our second gamer. As I'm sure you remember, I mentioned the fact that he uses a communication aid, but he operates it with the switch by his left knee. Now, his speech and language therapists have been trying for quite some time to see if they can progress him onto using a eye tracking camera for communication, and he's not really convinced by the idea. And so, although he's able to do so, he finds it kind of not that accurate and a little bit difficult, even though there's some clear advantages to doing so. So his speech and language team have approached us and asked if they can come into the centre and leverage our use of games in order to help his communication progress. And obviously, I'm not an OT, I just work with them an awful lot, and I'm not a speech and language therapist, I just work with them a lot. So we've agreed, and what we're doing is we're arranging now for him to come in separate to our gaming sessions, because this is, again, all part of our remit, and having him play games while under the guidance of his speech and language therapist, using a communication aid to play those games. So now, not only, if I move the tab along, is he using a communication aid for eye tracking, eye tracking for a communication aid, sorry, but he's using video games to improve those skills. He's using video games to open new doors for him. And this is a specific case, and he may decide that eye tracking just isn't his thing. Eye tracking's great, but it isn't a magic bullet that fixes everything. A lot of people in accessibility feel like eye tracking is the be-all and end-all, and it's really not. It's just a great tool for the people that it suits the best. But the fact that gaming is now being used by speech and language, and not small educational games or things like that, but AAA games. In the photos that I'm currently showing on the screen, he's using one of my devices with a Tobii eye tracking bar, linking into the Game On 1 by Praetorian, going into an adaptive controller, going into an Xbox. Also, he is using his communication device, well, mine, but theoretically his communication device, to play Kingdoms 2 Crowns, which is a nice little side-scrolling game. He's actually sat playing it 2-player with his sister operating the other player, and this is all part of his speech and language service lessons. And I think that's really amazing that gaming is really kind of leading the torch on this and helping to push new doors open, break down barriers, and that's why the work that everyone who would be watching this video is interested in being involved in is so important. So thank you for sitting through the talk, and I'm really appreciative that you spent your time today with me. I hope that you have found some benefit from this, especially seeing how the game on works, because that's relatively new, relatively not quite understood technology yet. But also I hope you've enjoyed the other talks, and a big thank you for spending your time with me. If you'd like to reach out and support the charity in any of the works we do, or are interested in seeing if there's any advice or support that we could offer to you, don't hesitate to contact us. You can email us at contact@everyonecan.org.uk, or you can get me specifically by just tweeting at me. I'm at sure about that on Twitter. I also put my Discord way up at the start, so feel free to go back and grab that if you so wish. So a big thank you for you to watch, and a big thank you for the team at the GaConf for running this event. Thank you. Goodbye.
Another wonderful talk. And I think one of the easiest ways to summarize this, as it was put in the Discord, there was a lot of talk of, it shows how devoted gamers with disability can be, how many gamers would keep their hobby if they had to spend as much on their control setup as the actual console. And Andrew had just responded in chat, gamers are gonna game. So with that, we're going to be taking a very short break because that talk ran a little over, but that's okay. I allowed it. And we will be back in about 3 minutes. So this is going to be a short one for our last talk of the day. So quick, get in your very fast bathroom breaks, and I will see you back here. We have been blessed with my chair's in the way. Louise. She's sleepy. She's very, very confused. She doesn't understand what's happening or why we're awake or why we're upstairs at this time. Which, look, I get it, Louise. We've made some poor life decisions that brought us up to this point. Mostly being friends with Ian Hamilton. I guess loving accessibility. That also brought us here. All right. And so now we are going to our last talk of the day, which of course is another one that I am very excited about. This will be happening in the Make It a Pillar channel in Discord. So Make It a Pillar, prioritizing accessibility in the AAA market. In this presentation, Ryan will talk about the Forza Horizon 5 team's strategies for keeping accessibility a top priority through a multi-year development cycle. And he's going to describe some of the challenges the studio faced in creating the sign language support features. So I'm very excited to be showing this one because this is a game that was very, very near and dear to my heart. Oh, and I actually shout out to Cameron in the chat. Cameron was actually one of the consultants who was at the Inclusive Design Sprint, where the idea for ASL, BSL in Forza came from. So hello, great to see you. So, all right, let's watch.
Hello, welcome, and thank you for coming to this talk, Make It a Pillar, Prioritizing Accessibility in the AAA Market. I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Ryan Green, and I'm the lead game designer at Playground Games. Now, that's all well and good, you might say, but what does this guy know about accessibility? And if you'd asked me back in early 2019 when I just joined Playground, my answer would have been, not much. I had a vague interest in game accessibility as I'm colorblind myself, but beyond my own experiences, I was pretty much a novice. But my colleague at Turn 10 Studios, John Knowles, asked me to represent the Forza Horizon franchise as an accessibility champion. And in order to do so, that meant I would need to do a fair bit of research. I needed to become the Horizon team's resident expert on accessibility, and I looked for guidance everywhere. In Xbox Game Studios guidelines, in community sites like Can I Play That, and in other games, games that were getting praise like Gears of War 5 and Celeste, and also situations where game accessibility had gone infamously wrong. And so I came out of all of that, not quite feeling like the expert I was supposed to be, but at least having an idea of what our target was. And I took that and ultimately shaped it into a design for the accessibility features in Forza Horizon 5. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the accessibility updates we've made in Forza Horizon, and we'll also do a more in-depth look at our recent big accessibility feature, sign language support. I'll be going over some of the challenges we faced while building accessibility features and how we reacted to them. And finally, I'll be talking a little bit about what we've got planned for the future of accessibility in Forza Horizon. A bit of history first. I'm not the first person to talk about the Forza franchise at the Game Accessibility Conference. No, in fact, John Knowles, the very instigator of my own journey into the world of accessibility, that honor goes to him. He gave a talk at the Game Accessibility Conference 2019 titled Making Forza More Accessible. He talked about some of the history of the Forza franchise and its growing emphasis on becoming more accessible. He described Turn 10's experience with an inclusive design summit, which is going to be relevant to some of Playground's own experiences with that. And finally, he finished off with his own wish for the franchise. He pointed out that the subtitles in Forza Horizon 4 were not quite what we wanted in terms of accessibility. The version we had at the time was slick and stylish, but actually missed a lot of marks on actual accessibility, and John wanted to see that improve. So that was 3 years ago. What happened since then? Well, first of all, we overhauled all the subtitles in Forza Horizon 4. You can see the original version of Horizon 4's subtitles here. It's rather telling that I was tempted to zoom in on this image so that it'd be easier for everyone to see the subtitles, but I decided that would be cheating. As you can see, the subtitles are tucked away in the bottom corner. There's the speaker's name down there, but it's buried by a little speaker icon, and the text itself is rather tiny. We rightfully got some critical feedback from accessibility communities about this feature, so we changed it. The subtitles got a full visual overhaul in a live update to Forza Horizon 4. We let go of our fancy iconography and went straight for the BBC subtitle guidelines. We changed the font, placed the subtitles in the bottom center where literally everyone expects them to be, and we let players customize their text size and background. We also added a subtitle bolding option, which I'll go into a little bit more later. And these changes actually caused Can I Play That to revisit its original Horizon 4 review and graced us with their Best Post-Launch Patch Award. This in particular was tremendously gratifying to the team, as Can I Play That's original criticism of our subtitles is part of what spurred us to make those changes in the first place. And part of what inspired the team to make those sweeping changes was that Playground got the opportunity to participate in an XGS-sponsored inclusivity sprint. So these are really cool 3-day whirlwind training courses. I really can't sing their praises enough. We got a lot of time to sit down with subject matter experts, people who can relay the perspectives of communities with disability in a way that helped us understand accessibility problems in a much more nuanced way. It really energized the team and gave them some new ways to think about accessibility. Instead of just limits on what we could do with text or colors, it became a question of how can we actually enable more people to play our game. And along the way, we learned some really surprising facts about how players with disability actually play, things we couldn't have ever figured out on our own. In particular, we learned a lot of interesting things about hard of hearing communities and how they play games. Many players who are hard of hearing, particularly those who were born deaf, actually treat written English as a second language. Their sign language is their primary language. It's the sort of thing that sounds obvious after you say it out loud, but this was mind-blowing to us at the time. We had thought that the answer this whole time had been subtitles, just get them right and call it a day. But no. It turns out that while subtitles are essential for hard of hearing players, they're actually not optimal for many situations. Subtitles means you have to speed read nuanced text, often while actively playing the game, and now we've realized that someone who primarily signs is speed reading text that's in a second language for them, and yeah, you can start to see how some players would get overwhelmed by that. The concept for subtitle bolding came right out of that sprint, and we made it part of the subtitle overhaul in Forza Horizon 4. So by bolding key words, we made it easier for players to pick out the important bits of content in each VO line. But of course, we still had a question hanging over our heads. We'd made things better by improving the subtitles, but it still felt like there was a lot of room to do more. Before I jump into development of Forza Horizon 5, I do want to go over a concept we use at Playground called pillars. These are the touchstones that the Horizon team uses to guide ourselves on every project. These are the core concepts that drive what Horizon is. They've been pretty much set in stone for most of the franchise's history. One of the pillars is freedom. We want players to be in control of what they're doing. Another is beauty. We always want to make sure that players are invited into worlds that are a treat to behold. And we've got Horizon Fun. It's a game after all. I mean, what are we even doing if we're not having fun? And like I said, these have been solid. These have been our foundation for a while now. But we were building the plan for Forza Horizon 5, and we decided that we actually needed something more, something that represented what Horizon was becoming as we moved towards being an online space for players to meet and play together. We added a new pillar, community. And of course, we had to define what community meant to us and broke that down into 3 parts. Players had to feel welcome, and that feeling had to extend to all players, meaning it had to be inclusive and, of course, accessible. So what does that mean? It means that now accessibility has top billing. When we're not sure what direction to go with a feature, we use the pillars to know our goals. And at this moment, we had inscribed accessibility into the core of what we were trying to do with our games. And this was huge for us. In that early blueprint of what would eventually become Forza Horizon 5, we had a feature planned out. We called it the Holistic Accessibility Approach, mainly because I absolutely cannot resist giving things fancy names. So what is holistic accessibility? Well, really, it's an obscure way of saying that we weren't going to drive all of our accessibility efforts into some fancy, glamorous-looking feature that would cost more than it needed to and probably wouldn't end up being all that accessible. We had been down that road before, and we knew a bit better this time. So instead, we went for the obvious. Find out where others have done something well and join them in doing that. Find out what players expect and what they're asking for, and just do that. Fill in as many accessibility gaps as we possibly could. And this led to a plan with a much wider set of options, customizations, texts that can be resized beyond just subtitles, screen reader support, improvements to our auto steer. Our main big ticket item at the time was inspired from Celeste. Why not let players control the speed of the game itself? In fact, we had already given ourselves the ability to do this through our debug controls, and it's part of how we make those cool cinematic slow-mo moments. So we just took that ability and put it in the hands of players. So now if the game is moving a bit too fast for a player to keep up with, they can tune it to their liking. And overall, Playground liked this plan. It made a lot of sense to look at accessibility from a sort of utilitarian, how can we close the gaps kind of way. It just felt like we weren't pushing ourselves as hard as we could. We were happy to borrow best practices from elsewhere. Don't reinvent the wheel, right? But still, maybe there was something unexplored there, something we could do to not just keep up with the industry on accessibility, but to help push it forward. And so we decided, you know what? Let's go for it. Let's keep everything we said we'd do because we think they're good to just do. But we need to push the envelope a little bit. Let's try and put sign language into the game. And of course, that just opens the door to a whole load of new questions. Which sign languages are we supporting and how many? We weren't sure exactly how we were going to do this yet, so we wanted to start small, but we also wanted to make sure that we built ourselves room to grow. We decided to support 2 languages, American Sign Language and British Sign Language, meaning we'd need to build a system that could choose which sign language to use. And that meant that we would have an opening in the future to add more languages as the opportunity arose. But how are you going to get these into the game in the first place? I mean, that's the real doozy. Animations are time and resource intensive, and The sheer complexity of animating sign language alone in a way that players could easily understand is rather intimidating. We looked for references in other games, but unfortunately didn't turn up much. Spider-Man Miles Morales has a cool mission where the NPC will sign to you. And we also ran into Moss, which is a VR game that features a mouse that signs to you. It's some really neat stuff, but nothing that was explicitly, this is sign language so players can understand what's being said. Nothing that formal. Instead, we found references in the real world from televised speeches and rock concerts, which feature live signed interpretation. And so we landed on the only way that seemed to fit into the project in any kind of practical way. We'll film someone signing and put that video into the game directly. Again, we found the best way was to build on ideas that had already been shown to work, even when there weren't any easy examples to lean on in the game space. So now that we've sorted that, we still have to figure out who we're putting in front of the camera. We could use an interpreter, as you'll often see in major speeches or other important events. Sign language interpreters are very accurate in reflecting exactly what is being said, but there's a lot of tonal information that's lost in that. Alternatively, we could hire deaf acting talent instead, and that's much better for on-screen presence and getting the vibe just right. But what about the translations? This feature is meant to make the game more accessible to players who sign, so we need to be sure that we're adding to the game a genuinely accurate translation. So we decided to just get the best of both worlds. We wanted the signers for both languages to seem like they were part of the Horizon Festival, like they were just a natural part of the game, and we knew we'd need to hire professional actors in order to get that feel. But we also knew that we needed to have clear, accurate signing in order to get players to have any benefit from the feature. We ended up pairing the actor for both languages with a certified interpreter of that language, supporting them directly during filming, helping adjust the actor's signing whenever needed. Even with these major questions sorted, we still had quite a few hurdles to deal with during development. Firstly, while picture-in-picture wasn't overly complicated to set up, it did have a hefty memory cost, hefty enough that it just couldn't really function during high-speed gameplay. However, we did find space for this during our cutscenes and cinematics, which is where a lot of the exposition and emotive language happens in our game. We also ran into some problems with the sheer size of the videos. So dimensions for these videos are small, and each individual file isn't egregiously large. But there are a lot of scenes in the game, and each video file starts to stack up. We're also going to be adding to these constantly. As new content gets added to the live game, new sign language videos will come along with them. And one option we're still considering is to separate these sign languages into optionally downloadable packs. We're not at that point yet, but for instance, if we add more languages, we'll need to address the size problem again. Another issue we ran into is that sign language is less editable than standard audio voiceover. With standard VO, you can clip or edit lines, tweaking things to make the timing of the delivery fit just right, but you can't really do that with sign language. You can't just cut a sentence out of the middle of a signed scene because you'd have the signer just blipping from one stance to another. It's not a good experience. But this means that initial filming of the sign language translation needs to happen after all voiceover work is completely final. Otherwise, any edit to a scene would trigger the need to completely refilm the signing. And finally, we realized that we were going to need some help getting proper feedback on this feature. XGS has been super helpful in this, and they've been helping us get in touch with communities of hard-of-hearing gamers. The big hurdle here, though, is how are we going to gather that feedback? We're trying to support players who see written English as their second language, so we needed to make sure that we gave those players a way to sign their feedback to us. Relying on purely written channels would essentially create a barrier for the very players we wanted feedback from the most. We're currently working with an organization to receive signed video feedback and attach English subtitles to the video, allowing us to directly receive feedback from players who use sign language. So let's say you're looking to put sign language in your game. What are the big ticket things that you should know beforehand? Well, first off, be ready to step into a massive network of communities. It can be genuinely overwhelming for outsiders. Sign languages are like spoken languages. There are styles, dialects, slang, all of which can complicate translation plans. One thing to bear in mind is that sign language can be surprisingly mobile, especially when an actor is voicing two characters in conversation. As you can see, the signer's orientation and body placement are used to indicate which character is talking, but from a technical angle, it means we needed to have strong guidelines in place for how far the actor should move from their center point. Otherwise, they risk stepping off screen. You'll also want to make sure you clearly label every piece of sign language content, because the only people who can verify videos are necessarily fluent in sign language. Everyone else has to go by the label. But wait, there's more. Context will always help with VO performances, but signing even more so. In order to properly capture a scene's dialogue, a signer will need not just the written line, but also tonal information, inflection, timing, and so on. The best case is to give the signer a final cut of the scene they're going to be translating. We also ran into some complications with mixed languages. In Horizon 5, this would occur when a character would mix Spanish and English words in the same line. If you have this sort of VO line and you're doing sign language, you'll want to have a strategy in place beforehand. Otherwise, the signer can get confused by what they're reading. Sign language also has its own set of tropes that will help clarify messaging, and it's good to follow these. They're not explicitly words or phrases, but just things that are expected as part of the rhythm of this. For instance, starting and ending every line in the rest position is a way to indicate to players that they should or shouldn't be watching the signer's movements at any given time. It's also important to align the timings of each signed line with the actual spoken VO. This is because players often will mix audio, subtitles, and sign language together, so if these aren't in sync, it can create a very jarring experience. And finally, this one feels obvious, but it's worth saying, no visual clutter. Players need to be able to see the signer's hands and face above all else, so don't go adding any fancy special effects or patterned backgrounds. Keep things simple. So we've done a lot, and we've put a lot of thought and effort into our accessibility feature set, but really there's only one question to ask at the end of the day. How did we do? Well, I'm happy to say that Forza Horizon 5 is a major step forward for us. The overall accessibility feedback for Horizon 5 has been very positive, and we were honored with Can I Play That's AAA Excellence Award, and the Game Awards recognized us for innovation and accessibility, all of which is a shiny way of saying that our simplified fill-the-gaps approach seems to really fit the bill. Personally, I point to our improvements to automatic steering in Horizon 5 as being the biggest impact in terms of our accessibility. If we define accessibility literally and ask ourselves how many players can access the content in our game, then I think the biggest increase in that pool of players comes from our changes to auto steer. Another perhaps more quiet win on the accessibility front was in our Horizon stories. These are chapter-by-chapter narratives that could be a potential roadblock for some players. So we made sure that even if players couldn't overcome a driving challenge, they'd be able to proceed with the story. Again, just taking accessibility literally. If we can grant access to players who wouldn't otherwise have it, then we should. That's not to say that all feedback was positive. We received some criticism for our world map requiring players to move a floating cursor through 2D space. This can be difficult for players with input restrictions and isn't very blind accessible. We also received some feedback about visual effects that can't be turned off by players, but some players find motion blur and bloom, for instance, distracting, so not being able to toggle them off became an accessibility problem. And finally, while auto steer did grant access to many players, it did so at the cost of kind of controlling what they did in moment-to-moment gameplay, which isn't ideal. As for sign language, how did we fare on that? Well, it's actually a little bit early to tell. We released sign language support for both ASL and BSL in our Series 5 live update. We had hoped to include them with the game at launch, but as I've described, the realities of filmed sign language make that nigh impossible. Releasing sign language support in an early live patch made more practical sense and gave us some time to develop customization options to coincide with the feature's launch. Players are able to modify the background of their signed videos and can choose where on the screen the video will appear. We're also working on the ability for players to resize these videos. Like subtitles, the best way to make a feature readable is just to let a player tweak it themselves. We've also begun our efforts in gathering feedback from hard-of-hearing communities on these features. We're still gathering feedback, and I don't want to be counting unhatched chickens, but I can say we've at least gotten enough positive feedback to know that this was worth doing. So that's the story of our accessibility journey through the development of Horizon 5. But what happens next? What now? Well, firstly, we're working with Turn 10 to make sure that accessibility features are shared across the Forza franchise. These efforts have already borne some fruit, actually, as Horizon's autosteer was built from tech originally developed by the Motorsport team. We're also working with the larger XGS org to share our learnings on sign language, with the hope that it will inspire more studios to support sign languages in games. As I said before, I'm personally crusading for interface improvements for our world map with the goal of supporting single-button navigation. This would theoretically make all of Horizon 5 accessible to blind players and represents the biggest gap in the game's overall accessibility. We're also looking at hold-free pedal control options, and I'm eager to see what comes from that. And finally, please bear with me, I'm going to be a bit selfish and steal this last moment to rant about accessibility in general. The biggest thing I've learned about accessibility is that, in the end, it all comes down to the numbers. There are some great feel-good moments when you're doing accessibility work, especially when you manage to grant someone an experience that they couldn't have had before. But when you're choosing what to prioritize and what features to pursue, it all comes down to access. Who has it and who doesn't? A feature doesn't need to be flashy, fancy, or slick to do its job. It just needs to grant players that access. Empathy. It's huge in accessibility. It helps us understand the different experiences that players can have. But it's also important not to let that fool you into thinking that you know the right answer. You have to be constantly checking in with communities, making sure that the features you're building are actually helping your target audience. PG was confident that subtitles were the answer for hard-of-hearing folk, right up until we had a subject matter expert, someone who lives this experience and who works with signing communities, give us a wake-up call. Don't bite off more than you can chew. In looking over the state of accessibility in games, you will find countless examples where poorly thought out accessibility features either didn't help their intended targets or died of starvation on the production room floor. If you want to avoid this, start small. Try to find simple or player-controlled solutions to problems. Flashy solutions are best saved for when the basics have already been mostly covered. And the last most important thing for accessibility in games, never stop listening. Accessibility is an extension of usability. It's user-friendliness, meaning you need to constantly be asking your players, how can this be better? Sometimes you already know the answer and you can just carry on with your plans, but more often than not, some of that feedback will surprise the heck out of you, will warrant some real consideration. And that's the conclusion of my talk. Thank you all for listening. I hope that you found parts of this valuable or at least interesting. So long. Bye.
I'm proud of the work to put sign language in the game. I hope it helps deaf and hard of hearing people have fun in Forza Horizon 5. and I need to practice my ASL. I was trying. It's been a little bit since I've actually had to use it. But I managed to get that out, so I'll take it. And with that, we are concluding day 1 of the Game Accessibility Conference. I, of course, absolutely loved all these talks, and I want to just highlight a few of the things that Ryan said right then, is that I really want people to listen about, don't bite off more than you can chew. Game development is still hard, and we have to be realistic. And when you attempt to do everything for everyone, you're probably going to make something that's kind of crappy for everyone. So be very specific and thoughtful about what you tackle and in what order, because it'll help make sure that you have a very good product. As Poppy, yes, in chat just said, be intentional. That's the words I was looking for. And so as we wrap up today, I'm going to remind you, we're going to be kicking back off at 10 a.m. tomorrow. We're going to have the talks online individually, properly captioned at the end of the conference, but the YouTube is live now if you need to go back and watch it. And as we wrap up today, I also want to say thank you to our partners at MyClearText, who we partnered with for our captioners and our interpreters. So thank you so much to our captioners today, Orla Pearson and Jen Cinnamon, and then our interpreters, Shara Roan, Liz Smith, and Stephanie Raper. We could not have done today without their work and their support. They are absolutely amazing in making today happen. So if you're looking for people for any event that you have where you need captions or British Sign Language, like these are the people. I mean, you've seen him all day. I mean, look how good he's doing right now. Literally phenomenal. Again, I also want to close by thanking our sponsors, because it's their money that allowed us to have this event for free today. So our gold sponsors are Microsoft, Sony Interactive Entertainment, and Ubisoft. And in our hearts, though not officially a gold sponsor, Mr. Kipling, the makers of the mini Battenberg cakes that you have seen so many of us eating today. Our silver sponsor is Riot Games. And our bronze sponsors are Splash Damage, Read Speaker AI, Player Research, and of course, Shara. With that, I'm going to go ahead and start having a Bloody Mary because, I would say it's time to drink, but it's only 9:30 a.m. my time. So, that's, I guess, what life is. But again, thank you so much. We will be here tomorrow, and I hope we get to learn even more lessons, and feel free to keep chatting it up in the Discord. Thank you so much, everyone.